What is the most up family secret that you have? Story 1. My father had other wives, possibly other children who don't even know he's dead. He passed away over 15 years ago when I was just a kid. He was a salesman who traveled frequently to port towns, selling machinery to the Coast Guard and various shipping companies. One day, my mother's friend showed her a picture of a missing person from Portland who looked almost identical to my father. Same initials and everything. But my mother never followed up on it. She convinced herself it had to be someone else. I feel sorry for those families. They believe their husband or father is missing when, in reality, he died from an infection. He always used to brag about what a great liar he was, and he wasn't wrong. After his death, I uncovered so many things about him, things I never would have imagined, like the hero in the garage. But I don't want to know any more than I already do. I'd rather just hold on to the few good memories I have left of him. Story 2. Ever since I was 12, I'm 16 now, my father has regularly tried to spike my mother's drinks, hoping she'd end up sleeping with him. And the messed up part? She knows. Sometimes she gets angry about it and complains, but in the end, she always drinks it. My mom is also having an affair with 3 other men. My dad knows and constantly calls her awful names, yet they stay together and are even trying for another baby. I have an older brother who's 19. I have no idea if he knows about any of this. One time I got curious and started reading my mom's WhatsApp messages. That's when I saw messages from all 3 of her lovers. At first I was just shocked, but then I realized something even worse. Technically, she's in a relationship with 4 men if you count my dad. And she actually wants a baby with both him and one of the guys she's dating. I couldn't believe it. Sometimes I wonder what her end goal is. What does she think she'll get out of this, other than complete shame and disgust from the rest of our family? Our aunts, uncles, grandparents. My dad constantly blackmails her, threatening to tell both his parents and hers, but he never follows through. It's a messed up situation, and honestly, it's a lot for a 16-year-old to deal with. But I just lived through it, hoping it'll all eventually blow over. Oh, and did I mention? Both of my parents are currently on trial for a fraud case dating back to 2007. Is this a secret? I guess so. I'm the only one in the family who knows the full story. Thanks for reading. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer as clearly as I can. There's a lot more to this, but I left some things out because, honestly, I'd probably just confuse both you and myself. Story 3. My aunt was in a long-term relationship for most of my life, probably over 10 years. A few years ago, they broke off their engagement, and my aunt decided to try online dating. She met a man, and after chatting for a while, they developed a long-distance relationship. She had a webcam, but the guy didn't. Instead, he would message her while she talked, watching her fall asleep and things like that. Eventually, she convinced him to talk on the phone, but when she finally heard his voice, she was shocked. It was a woman. The woman claimed that her deceased brother's soul was inside her body and that he was the man my aunt had fallen in love with. Despite this strange revelation, my aunt drove all the way from Vermont to Arizona and brought this woman back to live with her and her 3 children. That's when she started realizing how unusual the woman really was. She would leave bundles of sage outside my cousin's doors whenever she claimed there were bad spirits in the house. She convinced my aunt to sell most of her belongings. At one point, she even broke her own arm, claiming that spirits had pushed her down the stairs. For some reason, my aunt and this woman ended up getting a civil union. A few months later, the woman attempted to kidnap my aunt's youngest son and take him back to a cult in Arizona. Thankfully, she was caught, and my aunt was able to get her son back. But not before the woman had drained both her and my grandparents' bank accounts. Eventually, my aunt got the civil union annulled and has never seen or heard from the woman again. Story 4. A friend's parents owned a funeral home and had 2 sons. One of them was actually fathered by an employee of the funeral home, making the 2 boys half-brothers. However, the son raised by the owners never knew that his brother didn't share the same father. The son of the owners was deeply disturbed. One day, when he was still a child, he set fire to the funeral home, killing both of his parents. He believed he had also killed his half-brother. What he didn't know was that the employee had rescued his own son from the fire. Though the boy was badly burned, his father hid him away in a mental institution for many years. Over the next 20 years, the boy who burned down the funeral home took over the family business, becoming an undertaker. The employee, his half-brother's real father, stayed by his side as a mentor and father figure. Then, just as business was thriving, the truth came out in the most shocking way possible. on national television. The son who thought he had killed his half-brother saw him alive, though his face was now hidden behind a mask due to his scars. Since that moment, the two have been locked in a bitter feud over the family business. Story 5. Check out some of the more disturbing stories that have surfaced about the Kennedys. It's shocking stuff. One of the most chilling cases involved Mrs. Kennedy giving birth to a baby girl. She was not allowed to push until the doctor arrived because he needed to be the one delivering in order to get paid. So, the nurses were ordered to hold the baby's head in place until he showed up. Hours later, when he finally arrived, the baby had suffered severe oxygen deprivation, leading to developmental disabilities. The Kennedys, concerned about their public image, kept this a secret. But as the child grew older, they faced a new problem. What if she got pregnant one day? Mr. Kennedy came up with a horrifying solution. He approved a lobotomy for his daughter without the rest of the family's knowledge. At the time, doctors didn't fully understand the procedure. So instead of following a precise method, the surgeon simply cut into her brain until she lost the ability to speak. Afterwards, she was sent away to an institution for the rest of her life. The family told the other children that she had moved to the Midwest to teach and wanted her privacy. In reality, she was locked away, silenced forever. Story 6. I'm probably too late for this, but it's not entirely a secret. My mom was once married to a man who, unbeknownst to her, was a predator. She had no idea about his crimes until after they had already divorced. He left her as soon as he found out she was pregnant with me. Eventually, the truth came out when one of his victims managed to see the license plate on his scooter while he was assaulting her in a parking lot. He was caught, arrested, and later hanged himself with a belt in his prison cell during a break from court proceedings. At least that's how my half-sister, his daughter, as harsh as that sounds, told me the story. My mom never spoke about it. She remarried about 8 or 9 years later, but from pieces of conversations I've overheard, I strongly believe that my stepfather, her new husband, may have molested my half-sister when she was young. It's messed up. Our whole family is somehow broken in ways I can't even begin to process. I'm not using a throwaway account because my mom passed away last year, though her death had nothing to do with any of this. Story 7. My mom's older brother has been married 3 times. He has a daughter from his first marriage. She's in her 30s now, 2 daughters from his second, and a son from his third. I've always been relatively close to my male cousin since we grew up together, but I never really met my female cousins. My uncle cut off all contact with the children from his first 2 marriages. About 2 years ago, I found out why. His first wife was actually a woman he had attacked and assaulted when he was in his early 20s. When she got pregnant, he was forced to marry her and stay in the relationship for the sake of the child. This happened in China in the 1970s, when marriage and social expectations for women were still extremely conservative. The details of his second marriage are vague, but from what I've heard, my uncle fell in love with another woman and had an affair before eventually leaving his first wife for her. I hate my uncle, but my male cousin has no idea he even has half-siblings. Story 8. My husband's uncle pulled off a cruel and manipulative scam to get money from his own mother. He hired a medium to convince her to sell her house, give him the money, and move into assisted living. To make it believable, the medium revealed deeply personal details, things only family would know, like the fact that my husband's mother, his sister, had recently had an abortion. The medium painted a heartbreaking image for my husband's grandmother, claiming that her recently deceased husband was holding the aborted baby in the afterlife, crying. According to this so-called spirit, he was ashamed of their daughter and urged his wife to sell the house and give the money to their son instead. It worked. My husband's grandmother sold the house, handed over the money, and cut ties with my mother-in-law completely, calling her all sorts of horrible names. Worst of all, my mother-in-law believed this story for years. She carried so much guilt, thinking she had shamed her family. His uncle eventually spilled the truth while drunk at a pub, bragging about how he pulled it off. Story 9. We're all fairly certain that my grandmother and her lover killed my grandfather with some kind of poison. For about a year, my grandmother had been having an affair with a wealthy businessman. Then one night, she took all of my aunts and uncles to the movies. After the movie, she told the kids to stay in the car while she went inside the house alone. Just minutes later, an ambulance arrived, and my grandfather was taken away. She refused an autopsy, and his official cause of death was ruled a massive heart attack. But my grandfather was only 35 years old and in perfect health. It should also be mentioned that he was a successful scientist. He worked for NASA, taught at MIT, and held several patents. After his death, all of his wealth went to my grandmother. She immediately took that money and invested it in her lover's business. The problem? This man wasn't a businessman at all. He was a con artist. He took her money and disappeared. When my aunts and uncles got old enough to put the pieces together, they all cut off contact with my grandmother. Everyone except my mom, who remains suspicious but still stays in touch, knowing that she's old and alone. Story 10. Oh boy, here's one I can actually participate in. Since I don't know all the details, I'll keep this short. My cousin has always been in and out of jail. DUIs, weapons charges, drugs, you name it. As expected, my aunt still loves him and does whatever she can to help, no matter how many times he screws up. One time he needed bail money, but my aunt couldn't afford to pay it. That's when my grandpa stepped in, but in secret. He paid the full amount but told my uncle to take credit for it. He didn't want my grandma to know because she absolutely despised this cousin of mine. So now my uncle, the one who paid the bail, gets endless praise for his generosity, even though he's one of the most selfish, tight-fisted people you could ever meet. My dad comes from a family of 6, and the only people who know the truth are me, my parents, my grandpa, and my uncle. The irony? Every time my uncle gets himself into a bad situation, he plays the get-out-of-jail-free card, because everyone believes he bailed someone out once out of the kindness of his heart. In reality, he didn't give a damn. Story 11. I'm not sure who in my family knows this. Maybe only me and my sister. But I strongly believe that my mom caused my brother to be born brain damaged. She once confided in me that she had attempted to take her own life by drinking bleach. It didn't work. Shortly after, she found out she was pregnant with one of my brothers. It all makes sense now. The rest of us are fairly intelligent, but my brother always struggled. He exhibits unusual behaviors, clapping randomly, whispering to himself, going off alone and talking in funny voices. Now, as an adult, he drinks heavily. My mom isn't certain if her suicide attempt caused his condition, but I know she carries guilt over it. She always favored him, even when he was being a bully or making me and my sister uncomfortable. My dad, on the other hand, was too harsh with him. He would never acknowledge that something was wrong and refused to even consider getting him tested or treated. It was a messed up situation. My sister and I try to be kind to him, even though he scared us at times. What else can we do? I honestly don't think he means any harm, but he's messed up and we don't know how badly. Story 12. Everyone in my family believes my father died of a heart attack while on a business trip, but I have reason to believe that's not the full story. In fact, I think he may have been the victim of a crime. I was the only one in my family who traveled to the town where he died to speak with the authorities and bring his body back for cremation. Before his death, my father had been working on some business deals and had mentioned to me that he was expecting to come into a significant amount of money. That money was never mentioned again after his death. When I saw his body, I noticed telltale signs of struggle, things that didn't align with the official story. I suspected that some of his business associates had something to do with it, but I had no proof. Worse, these men were well connected in the town, and I knew I would get absolutely no help from the local authorities. With no way to fight it and knowing that pushing for an investigation would bring more trouble than anything else, I ultimately agreed to register his cause of death as cardiac arrest. I had him cremated and moved on. To this day, my mother, my brother, and the rest of my family have no idea. As for my father's business associates, who were supposedly our family friends, they disappeared from our lives completely after his death. This is something I'll take to my grave. Telling my family now would only bring them grief with no answers. Story 13. I've known this for about 7 or 8 years now. My father's father, and I refuse to call him my grandfather, Sully abused his own daughter, my aunt. To this day, he has never faced any consequences for it. The second thing I only recently learned when my grandmother passed away. About 10 years ago, my grandmother suffered a heart attack while in the bathroom. She cried out for help, but her husband, the same monster who abused his own daughter, was watching TV. He told her to shut up, said she was just trying to get attention. She lay there on the bathroom floor for hours, suffering, alone, ignored. By sheer luck, a family friend who happened to be a doctor called their house that day. He wanted to talk to my grandmother. If he hadn't made that call, she would have died right then and there. She survived, but her heart never fully recovered. 10 years later, her weakened heart finally gave out. She couldn't fight anymore. If that man had just listened to her, my Nana would still be alive today. And I swear, if I could, I would make him pay for what he did. Story 14. This one completely shocked me, and honestly, it's pretty messed up. A few days after my 16th birthday, my father sat me down and told me I was finally old enough to hear the big family secret. I assumed he was about to tell me some joke or weird family story, but he was completely serious. He told me the reason I rarely saw my grandfather was because he had been involved in an organization back in Moscow. My dad said it plainly. Pops was in the Russian mob. He reassured me that even though my grandfather had done some bad things, he was a good person and that we were safe. I still thought it was some kind of joke until he pulled out a photograph of my grandfather standing among a group of Russian mobsters, all smoking together. I had always wondered about my grandfather's sketchy friends, but I never expected this. Then my dad hit me with another bombshell. My maternal grandmother, the one from Shanghai, had been married before she met my grandfather, who was English. Her first husband had been involved in a criminal organization in Shanghai. Apparently, she had an affair with my grandfather and ended up pregnant with my mom. Instead of leaving her, her first husband decided to stay and raise my mom as his own. Years later, my mother and father met at a boarding school in Germany, got engaged in college in England, and that's when my paternal grandfather met my maternal grandfather. Turns out the two gangs had a rough history in arms trading during the 1920s, and an argument escalated into something far worse. My paternal grandfather ordered a hit on my maternal grandfather. At the time, my mom was already pregnant with me. The moment she found out what had happened, she split up with my father. My dad got custody of me, and my maternal grandmother married an Englishman and moved to India. My mom, on the other hand, moved to Brazil, and years later, she tragically died at the age of 40, killed in a shark attack while on a trip to the Caribbean. At first, I thought my dad was messing with me. My mom was in the next room. A week later, I confronted him again. That's when he casually dropped yet another bombshell. The woman I had called mom my entire life wasn't actually my biological mother. She was just his wife, a Dutch woman who had grown up in Algeria. He had met her while living in Nisswa, Minnesota. Obviously, I was shaken to my core. I eventually moved to Bemidji, Minnesota, just to get away from it all. Story 15. My cousin's mom probably murdered her and her boyfriend. My cousin had struggled with substance abuse for years. Her kids had been taken away, and somehow her mother, my aunt, became their foster parent. She even received state money to take care of them. I have no idea how she managed that. But then my cousin got clean. She was determined to get her kids back and start fresh. She was doing everything right, staying sober, building a stable life, and even preparing for the arrival of her fourth child, her first daughter. She was so close to getting her kids back. That's when my aunt took her to a bar. A bar. That night, my cousin died. No one suspected anything because sadly, with people recovering from addiction, relapses happen. It seemed like one of those tragic but common stories. You think they're finally doing well, and then they overdose. But then 2 months later, the kid's father, who had also gotten clean, was ready to take them in. He was stable, prepared to take care of his family. My aunt took him to a bar. That night he died. No one went to the police with their suspicions. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was just that there wasn't enough evidence. But the kids were taken from my aunt's custody, thank God. Unfortunately, they ended up in foster care, completely orphaned. It haunts me that I couldn't do anything for my cousin's kids. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life. Story 16. One of my family members, someone I'm close to, got drunk and told me the real reason my parents divorced. I had always grown up believing that my mom caught my dad walking out of a hotel with another woman and refused to tolerate that kind of betrayal. So she packed up and left. That was the story. The real story was much worse. My dad had nude photos of his ex-girlfriends, and he was obsessed with adding my mom to his collection. He harassed her about it constantly. She refused. She didn't want to be part of whatever twisted thing he was doing. She had this habit. She loved a certain kind of soda but never finished a whole can in one sitting. She would drink half and put it back in the fridge to finish later. Then out of nowhere, she started having terrifying episodes. She would drink her soda and suddenly be unable to stay conscious. It kept happening, and she had no idea what was wrong. Then she found them. Photos of herself. Naked. Unconscious. She put the pieces together. My dad had been drugging her and taking pictures of her without her knowledge. She found his stash of prescription drugs, Seroquel, or something similar. She knew she had to leave. She packed everything up and tried to escape, but my dad trapped her. He barricaded her car in the garage, disabled the garage door, and messed with the car itself so she couldn't drive away. Luckily, his own mother, my grandmother, was on her side. She took her luxury sedan and pushed my mom's car to the nearest mechanic. That was the only reason my mom was able to get away. She never went back. My parents don't know that I know, but I've spoken to my stepmother about it. She confided in me that she had also experienced unexplained blackouts, times where she felt suddenly exhausted for no reason. Always on nights when she had plans my dad didn't want to attend. It makes me sick. Story 17. Over the years, I think my family has truly taken the cake for being one of the most messed up families out there. It all started with my great-great-grandmother. She found out that my great-great-grandfather was supposed to meet his mistress in the next town over at the train station. He never made the trip, but she did. She got off the train, shot the mistress, and then casually rode the train back home. This was in the late 1890s or early 1900s, and incredibly, she never faced any consequences. Apparently, because the woman was just a mistress, no one really cared. My grandmother had a child before she met my grandfather, but he never knew. The baby was secretly raised by her older sister as her own. My grandfather was another story. He had a long-running feud with a local cop, and one day while driving through town, he saw the officer walking on the sidewalk. Without hesitation, he swerved onto the sidewalk and ran the cop over. He didn't kill him, but he definitely messed him up. And once again, no one got in trouble. This was the 1950s, and my grandfather had deep connections in the town. Then there's the ongoing debate about one of my uncles and how he actually died. He had just returned from Vietnam, and he struggled after coming back. The official story was that he took his own life. But there's a persistent rumor in my family that another family member killed him and staged it to look like a suicide. Another uncle of mine was officially Special Forces in Vietnam. But before he died, he would get drunk and tell stories about being in countries that, officially, only the CIA was involved in. He also had some disturbing stories about encounters with prostitutes in those places. Stories I wish I could forget. Then there's my father. He was an abusive, womanizing asshole. I have two half-brothers, one from a relationship before my mom and another from my 15-year-old babysitter. Speaking of my father, my brother, who happens to have the same name as him, was once arrested and spent several days in jail on a warrant meant for my dead father. This was years after my dad had killed himself. Story 18. Throwaway, as is family tradition. My father's side of the family comes from the Midwest. My grandparents' families had immigrated from Europe when they were infants, along with their brothers and sisters. As adults, they ended up scattered around different nearby towns. My grandfather was an MD, as were two of his brothers. They were small-town doctors who handled house calls and everything else that came up. One morning, they found one of my great-uncle's nurse assistants dead on an operating table in his office. It looked like a botched abortion. But the real kicker? My great-uncle had vanished, leaving behind his wife and kids. The family whispers suggest he was having an affair and tried to perform an abortion after hours. When it went wrong, he panicked and disappeared. According to my father and an uncle, there were rumors that he eventually sent a postcard from Alaska years later, but no one could confirm if it was really him. I tried to bring it up with my grandparents, but they refused to say anything about him. No one else in the family ever talked about it, except for my dad and that one uncle. It's like he just ceased to exist. Story 19. My mother's side of the family has a tragic history, not exactly a secret, but not something many people know about. When my mother and her siblings were young, their father was in a terrible traffic accident. He survived, but his memory was completely wiped. He had to relearn everything, how to speak, how to function. For a while, the only thing he could say were curse words. But the worst part was that he never truly loved his family again. To him, they were just strangers. The emotional connection was gone. He started cheating on my grandmother constantly. The stress of it all broke my grandmother. She began hearing voices. Seeking help, she was sent to a psychiatrist who prescribed electroshock therapy. This was in the 60s or 70s when mental health treatment was much harsher. She was released, but the voices didn't go away. Then one voice told her something terrifying. It warned her that if she didn't go back for more shock therapy, her son would die. Not long after, her son, my uncle, was hit by a truck while riding his bike. He didn't survive. The voices didn't stop. Another one told her that if she didn't either go back to shock therapy or end her own life, the rest of her children would die too. She believed it. So, in an act of desperation, she took her own life with a gun, convinced that she was saving the rest of her kids. Most of her children are still alive today, but what they went through left scars that never fully healed. Story 20. I found out about this not too long ago from my mom. I don't have the courage to ask my grandmother for details. She's in poor health, and honestly, she might be the sweetest person I've ever known. But the story goes like this. When my grandmother was a young girl in the early 1950s, she was walking down a sidewalk in Mississippi with her two older brothers. A black man walked past them, still on the sidewalk. Apparently, in that time and place, black men were expected to step completely off the sidewalk to let a white woman pass before continuing on their way. This man didn't. He just walked by. That was enough to enrage my grandmother's brothers. Right then and there, one of them pulled out a pistol and shot him. I don't know what happened afterward, whether the man lived or died. But I do know that neither of my great-uncles ever faced any consequences. And honestly, based on what I remember about that side of the family when I visited Mississippi as a kid, I have no trouble believing the story. Both brothers are dead now, and I can't say I feel any sadness about that. Story 21. I recently learned something about my family that completely threw me. My grandmother was either drunk, high, or both when she slept with not just my grandfather, but also his brother. She got pregnant. Now, my mom looks exactly like her cousins. You can put two and two together. That was shocking enough, but then there's my story. As a baby, I suffered from chronic ear infections. The current theory is that one of those infections reacted badly with a rubella vaccine. What happened next? I had a stroke, a full-blown stroke. My dad, who has a background in the medical field, told my mom not to tell the hospital about it. His plan was to retrieve the medical records himself. But my mom, being my mom, ignored him and went straight to the doctors, asking about it. By the time my dad went to get the files, they were gone. Somehow they had just disappeared. So technically, there's no official record of my stroke. It's as if it never happened. It's frustrating as hell. Story 22. My dad's family is all sorts of messed up. And the only reason I even know about it is because of my mom, who, to be fair, is also pretty messed up. My grandfather was married to his first wife, and together they had somewhere between 5 to 8 kids. I don't even know the exact number. They also had a live-in housekeeper/nanny. When my grandpa's first wife died, probably of cancer, he wasted no time. Before her body was even cold, okay, that's hyperbole, but still, he married the housekeeper, my grandma. She got pregnant soon after and had a daughter. Needless to say, my grandfather's first set of children were furious and refused to recognize her as their sibling. 15 years later, my grandma got pregnant again, this time with my dad. Meanwhile, my dad's sister, his 15 years older half-sister, was also pregnant. She had a daughter, then my grandma had my dad. Since they were born so close together, they were raised as siblings, even though they were technically aunt and niece. My grandfather was a farmer and owned the family homestead. Not one of the first set of children stuck around. My dad was forced into being the heir apparent, the only one guilted into taking over the farm. And my grandparents? They were mean, selfish, religious fanatics and raging alcoholics. They manipulated my dad into giving up college and pushed him into farming. Then when my grandpa died and left the farm to my dad, guess who suddenly came back around? All those estranged first-set kids, they wanted their share. These people had never spoken to my dad, never helped with the farm, never even cared about him. But suddenly, when there was land and money involved, they came crawling back. And my dad, being the good guy that he is, he divided the farm evenly among all the surviving children. His reward? They sold every bit of their land. This bankrupted my dad. Meanwhile, my mom was out having an affair with a married seed salesman, something I only recently found out about. Basically, my dad's life completely fell apart all at once. But despite everything, he remains the most forgiving, loving, and even-tempered person I've ever known. And then a month ago at my brother's memorial, my dad introduced me to his dad's grandson, my dad's nephew. The kicker? The guy was 25 years older than my dad. Still, my dad, being the gracious person he is, accepted the condolences from that side of the family. And I really hope it meant something to him to finally receive some kind of acknowledgement from them. Story 23. My great-great-grandfather grew up on the East Coast in the late 1800s. He came from a poor family and had to take on various odd jobs to make money. At some point, he encountered a man who offered him and a group of young men a position on his whaling ship for a certain period. They were promised a fair amount of money, so they agreed to go. They embarked on a long whaling voyage that lasted around 6 months. However, when they returned to port, they were given far less money than originally promised. My great-great-grandfather and the rest of the crew did not take kindly to this and ended up severely beating the whaling ship captain, possibly to the point of death. Fearing the consequences, they all fled and disappeared into what was then considered the Wild West. Eventually, my great-great-grandfather ended up in Utah and became a coal or copper miner. Tragically, he lost his sight in an explosion. My great-grandmother never spoke about this part of the family's history and would become visibly upset whenever anyone brought it up. Story 24. Growing up, I would occasionally hear my uncles make vague comments about my grandfather's side of the family. Now that I'm older, my uncles see me as an adult and finally decided to tell me about our extended family. It turns out that my grandfather's relatives are deeply involved in the drug trade in Mexico. My mother's uncles are among the high-ranking figures of a cartel there. Last year, while visiting family, we had a huge gathering. Many relatives I had never met before showed up, and the moment they saw me, they instantly asked who I was. It wasn't until my uncle explained my identity that I was properly introduced. I even shook hands with a man and his sons, who, as it turned out, were actually his bodyguards. After the party, I was told that I had unknowingly shared a few beers with a man worth millions, someone actively wanted by the U.S. authorities. It was surreal to hear stories about this seemingly kind and charismatic man, knowing that he had ordered and carried out the deaths of many, simply for money. Now, whenever I listen to Corridos and hear our last name in the lyrics, I get a strange feeling knowing that they are singing about my own family members and the lives they have taken. Story 25. My aunt adopted 2 children who come from a deeply troubled family. Their mother has severe cognitive impairments, but has had 7 children with an unknown father. The state suspects that the mother's own father is actually the children's biological father. But since she refuses to admit it, DNA tests are unlikely to happen. But that's not even the worst part. I don't know what happened to the 2 oldest boys, but the 2 oldest girls suffered horrific abuse at the hands of their grandfather, who was also believed to be their father. They were also forced to harm each other. The 3rd youngest child was confined in a homemade cage, constructed from chicken wire, for most of his life. He has severe autism and multiple other developmental disabilities. He will likely never learn to speak, but interestingly, he absolutely loves doing laundry. The 2 youngest children were born after CPS had already removed the others, yet they too suffered abuse at the hands of their parents. My aunt adopted the 4th oldest child, one of the girls who had been forced into making exploitative material, and the youngest boy. Almost all of the children have autism, and most have some degree of cognitive impairment. I'm currently their godfather, as my aunt is frequently in and out of the hospital due to lupus. I was only 17 when I first heard their story, but I couldn't live with myself knowing that these children would be left to navigate the system alone. As of now, 3 of the 7 kids remain in the system. I think the oldest aged out last month. It's a heartbreaking situation. Story 26. Years ago, when I was 21, my dad, just to spite me, sent me an email filled with all sorts of nasty remarks. But among them was something that has burned into my mind ever since. Your mom's father isn't her biological father. I was completely taken aback. For all these years, I had believed that my grandfather, the man I spent so much time with, playing and learning from, was my real grandfather. And to think every time we worked on math problems together, he's a brilliant engineer who helped build some of Europe's largest power plants and football stadiums, I would joke that I clearly didn't inherit his math skills. Turns out I was 100% right about that in a way I never expected. Only my mom and grandmother know that I've learned this secret. No one else, not even my sister, has any idea. But in the end, it doesn't change anything. He's been my grandfather all my life, and that's how it will always be. Still, it does make you think about ancestry and identity. Honestly, I'm actually relieved by this revelation. My grandmother's side of the family is known for their good looks, whereas my grandfather, well, let's just say he wasn't quite as lucky in that department. Sorry, Granddad. Anyway, my dad is a piece of work. He tricked me for years into believing he was the best person in the world, and I treated him as such. But when he decided to stop paying child support, money that helped my mom raise me and my sister, he showed his true colors. They're obviously divorced, and legally there was nothing he could do to get out of supporting us. But instead of doing the right thing, he dragged me, my mom, and nearly my sister, who was underage at the time, through endless court battles, digging up whatever dirt he could to avoid responsibility. The irony is he always had money. He just wanted more. He figured that since I was managing to study and live on my own, I could fend for myself. But in the country I live in, that's not exactly realistic. The truth is, he never really cared about his kids. And honestly, I wouldn't have cared about his money either, if it meant I could have had the father I once believed he was. Story 27. When my grandma was 18, she left Nebraska and moved to California on a whim. While there, she met a man and got pregnant. She was thrilled about having the baby, so she called my great-grandmother, her mom, to share the news. But before she could say anything, her mother started talking about my grandma's cousin, criticizing how she had gotten pregnant out of wedlock and expressing how shameful and disappointing it was. Hearing that, my grandma decided not to tell her at all. She was heartbroken. She stayed in California for a year, had the baby, and then gave her up for adoption before returning to Nebraska. She didn't want to bring shame upon her mother. I only found out about this when I was 18. My mom told me the story because she had been searching for a sister she had never met. I had questioned her about why my grandma always got so sad whenever we talked about her past. That's when I learned I have a 50-something-year-old aunt I've never met. Story 28. About 10 years ago, my aunt suddenly announced she was adopting a child. On that side of the family, there are about 25 grandkids, and I'm the oldest. I was 19 at the time, and even then, I was the only one who questioned it. My aunt already had 3 biological children and was in her mid-40s. Why were they adopting? Anyway, the kid arrived, and that was that. 2 or 3 years ago, my mom finally let it slip. The child wasn't adopted at all. He was actually my cousin's son. Apparently, my cousin had claimed she had been assaulted by a guy she was dating and ended up pregnant. Since my family is Mormon, she had the baby. Adoption was considered, but my aunt shut that idea down and decided to raise the child herself, technically raising her own grandchild as her son. The real kicker: my cousin was never assaulted at all. She had slept with the guy, got pregnant, couldn't handle the consequences, and falsely claimed she had been attacked. The man was never convicted of anything, thankfully. But it still blows my mind that this secret was kept for so long. For years, we all thought the hyper little kid running around at family gatherings was just our adopted cousin. Turns out, he was actually my cousin's son. Story 29. Late to the party, but my frail little great-aunt once shot and killed my great-uncle right in front of my grandma, while my mom, aunt, and second cousins hid in the back bedroom as children. Backstory: he was chopping down the door with an axe, screaming that he was going to kill every one of them. She did what she had to do to protect her family. Aunt Gigi is a badass, just with horrible taste in men. From the other side of my family, my dad's stepfather came home one day, angry and drunk. He had a habit of knocking my grandma around when he had too much to drink. But this particular day, my father, who was maybe 8 or 10 at the time, had finally had enough. He locked his stepfather out of the house. Step-grandpa, furious, started banging on the door, threatening everyone inside. And that's when my dad pulled his shotgun off the wall, stared him down, and told him that if he ever laid a hand on my grandma again, he would pull the trigger. That man never touched her again. Moral of the story: don't mess with my family, especially not drunk and threatening people while trying to break down a door. We have guns and we will use them. Story 30. Late to the party, but my frail little great-aunt once shot and killed my great-uncle right in front of my grandma, while my mom, aunt, and second cousins hid in the back bedroom as children. Backstory: he was chopping down the door with an axe, screaming that he was going to kill every one of them. She did what she had to do to protect her family. Aunt Gigi is a badass, just with horrible taste in men. From the other side of my family, my dad's stepfather came home one day, angry and drunk. He had a habit of knocking my grandma around when he had too much to drink. But this particular day, my father, who was maybe 8 or 10 at the time, had finally had enough. He locked his stepfather out of the house. Step-grandpa, furious, started banging on the door, threatening everyone inside. And that's when my dad pulled his shotgun off the wall, stared him down, and told him that if he ever laid a hand on my grandma again, he would pull the trigger. That man never touched her again. Moral of the story: don't mess with my family, especially not drunk and threatening people while trying to break down a door. We have guns, and we will use them. Story 31. I'm 31 and grew up in a small, lower-income household with just my mom and dad. No siblings, almost no extended family. Despite that, I managed to work my way into world-class schools and jobs, MIT, Google, etc. And ever since I was 18, I've almost played a parental role to my parents, helping them with their personal struggles, finances, and life in general. I say this to paint the picture of our family dynamic. They loved me, but they also encouraged independence. When I was 25, my dad was struggling with severe depression and suicidal thoughts. At the same time, my mom was having an affair with our neighbor, who was undocumented. One day, my dad confided in me saying, "I'm not really your biological father." He explained that he and my mom had divorced 3 years before I was born. My mom had been with multiple men, but my dad loved her deeply and had grown up in foster care with no real family of his own. When my mom got pregnant, she lied to him and said I was his. He knew the truth, but decided to raise me as his son anyway. When I was 10, my mom finally admitted to him that I wasn't biologically his. He already knew, but hearing it out loud made it real. Even then, he said his biggest fear was that it would somehow change our relationship. But that night, when he tucked me into bed, he realized it didn't change anything at all. That moment became one of the proudest of his life. Years later, my mom confessed the same story to me, including the biological father's name, matching exactly what my dad had told me. My dad battled depression for 7 years and attempted suicide multiple times, but somehow he pulled through. Now he's almost back to his old self, optimistic and happy, something I never thought I'd see again. My mom, on the other hand, has developed serious mental health issues, including psychosis. She also battles Graves' disease and refuses to see a doctor. She and my dad still live together in the same house they've had since I was 3, purely because of financial reasons and my dad's inability to leave her. I haven't lived in the same state as them since I went to college at 18. I try to call or text my dad every couple of weeks, but my relationship with my mom is almost non-existent. She can't hold a normal conversation anymore, just rants about things that make no sense. Story 32. My dad's parents married when my grandfather was 25 and my grandmother was 12. My dad's oldest sibling was born when his mom was 13. On my mom's side, things were only slightly less unsettling. Her parents got married when my grandfather was 19 and my grandmother was 15 because she was already pregnant. As for my dad, when he was supposed to start kindergarten, the school was full. His parents really wanted him to go that year, so they altered his birth certificate to make him appear a year younger. That's still the date on his official records, meaning he can't access Social Security until a year later than he should be able to. One weird thing happened to me in college. I met a guy with the same unusual last name as my mom's maiden name. We started talking, did some research, and discovered we were actually second cousins. We shared a great-grandfather. Given that my mom's dad was one of 19 kids, I probably have tons of second cousins I don't even know about. Also, all of my grandparents died of lung cancer. Every single one of them. And my dad? He told me he started smoking when he was 4. Story 33. My grandfather had an entire second family on the side. When my dad was a teenager, he walked in on my grandfather with another woman. That moment crushed him. My mom later told me that my dad had shared how much it hurt him to witness that, and that was why he vowed never to cheat on anyone. My grandmother knew about it, but back then, divorce was considered worse than death. She stayed with him. She also admitted that she hated intimacy, saying it disgusted her to even kiss someone. Not too surprising, given the situation. I never met this other family, but they showed up at my grandfather's funeral. My grandmother was furious. I didn't go to the funeral myself. My parents never told me he died until after my finals. As for my uncle, my dad's brother, he never got married, got into drugs, ended up in jail, and fathered a child he completely ignored. My grandmother insisted the child wasn't his, even though she apparently looks just like him. He never reached out to her. Recently, my uncle was diagnosed with AIDS. Honestly, I don't care if he dies. He's a hypocritical, awful person. Story 34. My grandma divorced my grandpa when my dad and his brother were in their teens. She later remarried a man who, when I was 12, was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison for harming a 5-year-old neighbor. It was traumatizing for our family. He and my grandma used to spend weekends at our house. While nothing ever happened to me, I can't say the same for my older sister. The worst part, my grandma defended him. She insisted he never did anything wrong. Even after he went to prison, she stayed with him. She visited him And when he was released a few years ago, she took him back. Now they live together just 10 minutes from our house. My dad refuses to have anything to do with them. No matter how many times my grandma shows up at our door, ringing the bell, we ignore it. I think my dad suspects my sister was harmed at some point. He never says it outright, but sometimes I hear him muttering about wanting to kill my grandmother's husband. My dad is a strong man, but this topic can bring him to tears in seconds. When the man went to prison, my parents personally reached out to the little girl's family to apologize. I don't know the full details, but whatever was said in that conversation deeply affected both of them. As for my grandma, she means nothing to us anymore. No one in our family will ever forgive her for standing by that monster. Story 35. Back in the 80s, my uncle embezzled a significant amount of money from the hotel where he worked. He ended up going to jail for a while, and after his release, he moved back home to live with my grandmother. He never left. For decades, he lived in a back room of the house, never getting a place of his own. Growing up, I would visit my grandmother, and my uncle would always have his friend Ronnie over. They would stay in the same room. I was young and didn't think much of it. My grandmother was quite naive, and the rest of the family never said anything. It took me years to realize that my uncle was gay. This year, my grandmother had to be placed in a nursing home due to her declining health. That's when my uncle started lashing out at my dad, aunts, and uncles, which made us all wonder what was really going on. When my dad was given power of attorney over my grandmother's estate, he discovered that property taxes on the house had not been paid for the past 3 years, despite both my uncle and grandmother receiving Social Security and disability, which should have been more than enough to cover the costs. Digging further into their financial history, my dad uncovered the full extent of the situation. My uncle had opened a credit line to cover overdrafts, routinely overdrafting my grandmother's account every month and dipping into credit to cover it. He had been ordering massive amounts of stuff online for himself, using her money, making cash withdrawals, and spending irresponsibly like he was some kind of philanthropist. He had even taken out a Lowe's credit card to remodel my grandmother's kitchen, bathroom, and living room, then never made a single payment. And then, the most bizarre discovery, he had spent hundreds of dollars per year on adult content subscriptions. He had been stealing from my grandmother for years, destroying her once perfect credit score and leaving her in massive debt, all while having nothing to show for it. The reason he had been lashing out? He knew the jig was up. Without access to my grandmother's Social Security checks, the house was going back to the state, meaning he would have to actually pay rent somewhere. And worst of all for him, my dad was about to find out everything he had done. Story 36. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a Nazi sympathizer, and 2 of her 3 brothers were officers in the Waffen-SS. The only one who survived the war was the brother who had served in the regular German army. Before the war, their family had been considered part of Germany's social elite. My father even has pictures from the 1950s showing his grandfather's bombed-out factories. After the war, my grandmother immigrated to the United States and married my grandfather. Ironically, he had been a tank commander in the U.S. Army during World War II and later served as an interpreter. He didn't see much combat, though. He was wounded in early 1944 and reassigned to intelligence due to his fluency in German. Maybe that's why she rationalized marrying him. According to my mother, my grandmother remained incredibly bitter about the war. She resented how it had destroyed her family, taken the lives of 2 of her brothers, and forced her to move to America, a country she never truly loved. She despised almost anyone who had been involved on the American side and carried intense animosity toward the Allies. She often told disturbing stories, like how one of her sisters was allegedly assaulted by Allied soldiers, or how she once stood in a bread line filled with women and children, only for planes with Allied markings to strafe the crowd with gunfire, killing most of the people around her. One of the most chilling things she ever said? If only the Germans had won the war, my father's name would have been in the SS. Story 37. My parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and since I was 6, I lived with my dad. When I was 9, my mom passed away. I was always told that she died because of alcoholism. Now I'm 27, and a few months ago, my dad, while drunk, told me something completely different. He said my mom had been possessed. He claimed that her face changed into something unnatural, like something out of The Exorcist. The voice that spoke wasn't hers, it wasn't even human. It was something else, something evil. According to him, this thing mocked him, saying he was incapable of love. It laughed at him. My dad said he fought back, insisting that it wasn't true. that he did love someone, his son. After that, whatever had taken over my mom left, but she was never the same again. She fell deeper into alcoholism and ended up living on the streets with a man who regularly abused her. My dad tried to help her, tried to get her into rehab, but she never stayed. He firmly believes that the man she lived with eventually beat her to death. But some of my mom's family still believe my dad was responsible. Now I finally understand why my dad has always been terrified of possession movies. He can't watch them, he can't even talk about them. I also understand his drunken rants, where he challenges the devil, calling him out to fight. One last thing, I once asked him where the possession had happened. He hesitated before finally saying, "In the house." When I pressed him, asking exactly where in the house, he refused to tell me. I asked why, and he simply said, "Because you'll be too scared when you come and stay here." When I visit him, I sleep in my old room. I'm almost certain that's where it happened, but I try not to think about it. Story 38. I have a twin brother and an older sister. My dad was extremely controlling. He took all the money my mom earned, and if she wanted to make any purchases, she had to write out a list, including the exact price of each item, account for tax, and calculate the total down to the penny. He would then give her only that amount. If she came back with anything extra or with the incorrect change, he would lose it. When we were about 4, my dad picked up my brother and threw him against a wall. He had to get stitches. Another time, he flipped him out of a grocery cart, smashing his head into the concrete. They had to call an ambulance. My mom told me that was finally the moment she left him, because if she didn't, he was going to kill one of us. By the time my brother and I were 5 and my sister was 9, we moved in with our stepdad. He was actually decent, but my mom, not so much. She hated that I was shy and introverted. Once my brother and I were arguing, and she sent us outside into the yard. She sat in a chair and told us that neither of us could come back inside until one of us made the other bleed. I had to break my brother's nose. I never thought much about that incident until much later in life. My older sister was also extremely violent. She fractured my brother's leg once. Another time, she held me down and spit in my mouth. She was physically abusive, constantly hurting us. My brother eventually started to act more like her, while I kept to myself. He believed that by aligning himself with her, he could protect himself. They locked me in a dark closet, screaming outside the door about how they wanted to kill me. I never told anyone. When my mom came home, I was just as scared of her as I was of my sister. There's something strange about the twins in my mom's family. There's a pattern, going back generations. There's always been a set of twins. But I realized something when I was about 20. In the past few generations, one twin always turns out normal, while the other struggles severely. Addiction, unemployment, complete instability. Despite my issues, I guess I'm the normal twin. But my brother? I started to wonder if something was genetically wrong with him. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I realized my mother had never recognized that her entire family was filled with alcoholics. I pointed it out to her during an argument. She dismissed me. A few months later, she admitted that in over 50 years, she had never noticed it before. She was almost in shock. She had become just as angry and hateful as the rest of them. Violence was normal to her. She was never a warm, loving mother. My dad physically beat us, but she treated us like she was a drill sergeant, screaming insults, slaps, just not as obvious as my father's abuse. I'll never forget how she spoke to me. I grew awkwardly and was always a little plump, not fat, just curvy. Whenever she was mad at me, she used the same insults. Hungry, hungry hippo, little Miss Food Fest. Now that I'm out of the house, out of the military, she tries to be nice, but she does it as if nothing ever happened, like she never shaped my brother, my sister, and me into what we became. When I was 10, my paternal grandmother took her own life. To this day, that funeral is one of only 2 where I lost my composure. She had always been kind to me. I remember stepping out of the church and sitting outside, alone, for the entire service. That was when I first became aware that people could just choose to die. You didn't have to wait for it to happen. It was a turning point in my childhood. Then came middle school. That's when I met Tina. 12-year-old me had no idea what I was dealing with. At first, Tina told me about her tragic life, how her uncle had hurt her, how her real mother had tried to kill her before taking her own life, how her stepmother was actually her sibling's mother, but not hers. She had cousins our age, and I even exchanged letters with them. I was lonely. Then she confessed that she had schizophrenia and heard voices. One day she chased me with a knife. And then the abuse started. She isolated me from my friends. She controlled my life for 4 years. Then one day I found out the truth. Her cousins didn't exist. Her real mother never existed. Her trauma never happened. She had made everything up, even the letters from her so-called family. I had them. I had physical letters. My mother blamed me for believing her. I was deeply traumatized. I had no support. I was alone. And the abuse continued. I didn't tell anyone about the abuse for years. When I finally escaped Tina, I realized how miserable I had been. It had become normal to me. I barely graduated college. I joined the military, desperate to get my life together. Finally, I saw a good doctor. PTSD, OCD, depression. Got medication. I still have bad days, but I can manage the anger. The nightmares are less frequent. My dad's second wife once tried to kill him with a butcher knife while we were visiting. Then she vanished. No idea where she went. My grandtie, Connie, lived next to my aunt for years. Turns out she and her roommate were dealing coca. They were also a couple. Every single one of my great aunts and uncles did time in prison. My maternal grandmother lived recklessly. My biological grandfather was in the Air Force. He had 3 kids with her before leaving for Vietnam. My mom met him for the first time at 2 years old. She ran up to him and said, "Oh, now I have 2 daddies." Turns out he had come home early, only to find my grandmother cheating on him. She had 3 more kids with another man. Grandpa chased the guy, but he escaped by jumping out of a window. Grandma married that man. He had been married too, and left his wife and 3 kids to be with her. He was a mean drunk. Got into a bar fight one night and beat a man to death. Spent 10 years in Jackson State Prison. By the time he got out, I had been born. We used to laugh about his blinking ankle monitor, not knowing what it really meant. For years, I thought he was my real grandfather. I didn't meet my actual biological grandfather until I was 9. I saw him one more time before he died. That step-grandfather? He had hurt my mom when she was a child. She kept it a secret for over 50 years. She refuses to talk about whether he hurt her siblings too. Apparently, before my parents divorced, my mom caught my dad cheating with a prostitute at a motel. She never talks about it. When my sister got married, her first husband started coming on to me. I was 17. He tried to kiss me in his car. I told my mom. She actually believed me and confronted him. My sister and her husband divorced shortly after because she had an affair. We never told her what happened. My paternal grandfather's brother took his own life when he was 12. I never even knew he existed until I was working on a family tree. I casually asked my grandfather about his siblings. He listed them off, then without missing a beat said, "Joseph killed himself." After my grandmother sued us, I learned horrifying things about that side of the family. My aunt was abused by her husband but was pressured to stay because of their religion. Instead, she had an affair. Their kids are adults now and every single one has issues. When I was 17, my brother tried to kill me. He jumped on my car, beating on the windshield, screaming. I hit the gas. He rolled off. Somehow I didn't run him over. I went to a friend's house. When I told my mom what happened, she didn't believe me until my friend's dad backed me up. Even then, I was punished. Story 39. I'm 27 years old. I have one half-brother, same mother, different father, who takes after his dad. I have never met my own father. He was nothing more than a sperm donor, essentially. My mom is now in her 3rd marriage, and this one has lasted over 10 years. Her husband is good to her, so everything worked out in the end. Anyway, this past spring, I was in my final semester of college, hanging out at a friend's house. We were both ridiculously stoned on a weekend when I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. The person claimed to be my younger sibling. He said he was my mom's 2nd child. She had him when I was 3 years old, but gave him up for adoption. He provided a bunch of details that matched up perfectly. Ever since I was 3, my mom has always told everyone that she had a miscarriage when she got pregnant a 2nd time by my father. But according to this guy, that was a lie. What really happened was that my father left her again, and she didn't want to raise another child on her own while serving in the army. She was in the military for over 20 years. So she gave him up for adoption. Still high and deeply suspicious, I immediately texted my mom. "WTF, is this email? Do you know anything about this?" She denied it vehemently, so I sent her the email. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. She knew I smoked and was fine with it, so the first thing she said was, "Call me when you're home and sober." I just looked at my friend and said, "Bro, I have another fucking brother." Later that night, when I called her back, she didn't deny it anymore. She admitted everything.